Welcome to Canadian Justice. I'm Christine Van Gyn, and today we're talking about cults and what your options are if you believe that you or someone you care about might be in a cult. Typically, cults exhibit certain psychological, social, and organizational traits, especially those involving manipulation, control, authoritarian leadership, isolation, and rigid beliefs demanding total conformity. Canada has seen its share of cults, some homegrown and others with international ties. Several of these cults have made headlines. Recently, a BC judge annulled the marriage of an 18-year-old woman to a fellow member of an India based cult group, saying that the woman did not truly consent to the wedding. And Canada has also hosted a branch of the FLDS in Bountiful, British Columbia, where its leaders were eventually convicted of various crimes, including trafficking minor girls across the Canada US border. Here today to discuss the topic of cults, identifying them, and your legal options is Carol Mercassin, a US based lawyer and head of sexual misconduct and spiritual communities at McAllister Oliveras. Carol, thank you so much for joining me today. You are known as the cult assassin. You've done investigations into a number of famous cults. Maybe we could start by you could explain how you got into that.
Well, actually, I kind of fell into it, Christine. I was uh, a management defense lawyer in corporate America. I did employment law, and in that capacity, I did investigations into sexual misconduct in businesses and organizations. And so I, uh, in about 2018, I volunteered to do an investigation for a woman who claimed that all of the children in the Buddhist organization that she was a member of had been sexually assaulted. I could not imagine that that was true. And so, in a moment of weakness, I thought, well, I'll just volunteer to help her. And I did, and I found out that a great deal of it was true. And it was very stunning to me because these were organizations, as I began to learn, that were less about um, doing the right thing. Um, they were not interested in doing an investigation, finding out what had happened, and correcting it. Um, and so, in a certain way, I found um, that some of the spiritual communities were not as responsive to these kinds of things as corporate communities were, and that was quite stunning to me. A lot of people then came to me and said, that's what happened to me as well. And I began doing pro bono investigations until I finally found that really there needed to be legal options that people could take advantage of. And I joined McAllister Oliverius. And that's what we do is we help people to determine whether they have a legal claim to begin with, and then to help them litigate that claim.
Now, you've actually been involved in investigations related to some pretty well publicized cults in the United States. What can you tell me about the ones that you've been involved in and what has happened and where things kind of stand now?
Well, we certainly were involved. I was involved very early on in the Shambhala community and the allegations of sexual assault there. They did undertake an investigation on their own, but there has to date been no kind of remuneration for any of the victims. And they have a long history of sexual assaults beginning back in the early 1970s.
And maybe
I
could
did
you
an
tell our viewers what the Shambhala organization is, just very briefly, so
Yes,
for those who might
yes,
not be familiar?
of course. They're a Buddhist organization in the Karma Kagyu lineage, with the headquarters in Halifax, in Nova Scotia.
Wow, so quite the Canadian connection there,
Yes,
although it's obviously
yes,
international.
hmm absolutely, because they also began in Boulder, Colorado, in the United States.
And I'm really fascinated because, of course, a lot of these organizations don't start out, as cults, or they might not start out as cults, and they might not start out with any of that type of either sexual misconduct or sexual abuse or financial misconduct or financial abuse that kind of becomes characteristic of a lot of these organizations. But that's sort of how over time many of them do transform. We've got to go to commercial break, but when we come back, I want to talk about that evolution and what are some red flags to look out for that you might be able to warn people about. We'll be right back.
Wonderful.